You rolling? I'm not going to try and pronounce that. But that is what you would be a part of if you are operating at in the general time frame, the time zone of line level consciousness. You are then in a place that is sometimes talked about in other terms, but this is where you would be, is in the great unseen triaxial brotherhood of mechanical man. Life itself, compared to a human viewpoint, is likened to being in a continuous stage of adolescence. And although physics and in times past, under other guises, even mythology and religion, have played around with the idea of the relative conditions of man's conception of time, old Hindu ideas of God's breathing in and out and creating universes in one breath, it's whatever they think it is, 10,000 years, 10 million years. The idea in the Western world of God's creating whole universes, their own bodies being conceived in a matter of 7 days. And then people in the ordinary yellow circuit trying to debate what all of this might mean. I will tell you in a quite real sense that there is what amounts to an undiscoverable relative condition between life's time, the overall body of life, and ours. And what I was going to from a little different way in a few minutes is as though life is in a continual state of adolescence, because you cannot see what life's origins were, and you cannot see with any certainty where life is going any more than you can see for any certainty through your own brain cells where you came from. You've got no knowledge of it, and you have no real knowledge of where you're going, except on bad days when it's raining and you pass a cemetery and there's a fleeting shudder that, yeah, I'm going to die. But then it's gone, just like you actually got a chill for a second, because there is no real stable yellow circuit consciousness of the fact I'm going to die. And let's see, right now I am 51, and according to the tables and the degree to which I'm overweight and how many cigars I smoke, I'll be dead in another, let's look at these tables, I'll be dead in another 14 years. Count on it. There is no stable knowledge of where you will be. When you're operating at line level consciousness, it feels as though that you're living in a certain kind of time frame. It feels as though you're living in a time that has a speed to it. Certain people seem to be wired up and feel as though the days are almost too short. There's so much more I could do if we had 32 hours in a day. There are other people who are wired up to feel as though each day is too long. It takes far too long to get the cocktail hour for my 8-hour day to be over. And I would just as soon if the sun would come up and maybe we'd have daylight for about 3 hours. Maybe I could handle that. And I had a job that lasted 90 minutes, and I had 90 minutes to eat and have 4 or 5 drinks and go back to bed. But one thing life talks about that I started to refer to is this feeling of some great common base that we all share. The religions and some humanistic philosophies like to speak of some great brotherhood. There is. And I could describe it from many different viewpoints, but T-Gut-B of MM is getting to something very specific. The great unseen triaxial brotherhood of mechanical man. It is unseen because ordinarily when life speaks through man about some sort of brotherhood or some common reality, some common feeling, some common persuasion, some common sets of beliefs that humanity either does share, that's been abandoned, or that they should share, it's all based on a binary system. That you should either share it with other people, and if you don't, that's not good. And so you're back to 2 possibilities. But notice I point out this is a great unseen triaxial brotherhood. It is one description of the basic brotherhood of everybody at line level. And what happens in this time zone, what happens in this unseen, this unrecognized brotherhood on a triaxial basis is you are pulled in by being born into this triaxial brotherhood that no one recognizes. We've been through this many, many times. The best anybody seems to recognize, if you were born an Irish Catholic and you were wired up to have apparently some great faith in this, then the brotherhood you see is all the other Catholics in the world, if not Irish, at least other Catholics, as being one camp. That's the proper brotherhood, and then those who are not. And an almost endless stream of other examples, from nationality to race, politics. But there's an unseen triaxial brotherhood, wherein the brotherhood that you are drafted into which you were born, always either has you pitted against, aligned with, or oblivious to your brothers. That is the great unseen triaxial brotherhood of mechanical man. It is from this kind of basis that you can begin to get some glimpse of the fact that you have got to see it and then be able to abandon it, to free yourself from the feelings that what life is thinking and feeling is what you are thinking and feeling. Because if you are simply going to live out your days being a part of this great unseen triaxial brotherhood that everyone is a member of, then everyone in the camp of man, everyone in the family of man, anyone that could be pointed out to you, you would either feel that you are aligned with, and forget your explanations, because they're life's explanations through you on a less than satisfying, on a less than competent level of dimensions. And so you would feel like those of your religion, your race, your nationality, other things that may even be beyond an immediate, apparent, lateral, reasonable explanation. But you would feel, out of everybody, people point out to you, this person there is either aligned with me, this person is pitted against me, or, when I say it pointed out to you, because you'd never get around to it, the other camp, the third in the triaxial division, those to whom you're normally oblivious. Unless you have some kind of continuing awareness of this in some form, then you forever, at least, except on these occasions you may be hearing me or being here with the tapes around somebody involved with this, the rest of the time, you continue to take everything that life feels, everything that life thinks, and you think, well, that's me. It is me that recognizes reasonable allies. It is. And I personally, that readily recognizes foes of decency, truth, and the possum way of life, everything I stand for. And, of course, that third group that somebody may point out to you that you just don't see any real immediate consequence regarding. The group to which you are oblivious. A part of this time frame, a part of the different time zones that I mentioned, is life having a continual, from humanity's viewpoint, of having a continual state of adolescence. And I assume many of you have heard, as I have read, somebody came up somewhere in psychology or sociology with a notion, a description of teenagers and the trying years and all their little hormones and all their innate spiritual desires to have a fast car. The apparent budding and development of so-called personality, I've heard it described by an ordinary paper routes as being a teenager's attempt, need, desire to, quote, find their own voice. And since I'm not above stealing from life, that is a fair description of what life, from man's viewpoint. You got at least 6,000 years of fairly hardwired history to depend on, and I'm not going to fool with telling you anything beyond that. We just take 6,000 years. It's as though life has been in that state of adolescence. If it were not so, life would have come to an end for humanity. That the great fears of man blowing themselves up, or perhaps even a better one, of the Big Bang getting inverted, and now we're getting into the big, what's the word bang backwards? Gab? This all going to shrink back up and go back into a state of symmetry, no heat exchange, and everything disappear. Now, from one viewpoint, that would be life reaching maturity. That would be the point that life had no more use for humanity. But let me tell you some ways that life is continually expressing this never-ending state of development, of its adolescence, of it attempting to find a voice. I'll see if I can't make up some examples. I assume I can, or I wouldn't have started this. But the examples that I can apparently make up regarding the external world are not that which of any great importance. It's what you can find existing in you. But it goes something like this, that when you have mechanical lateral change taking place in life, it's going on continually, that is a part of something growing, that is a part of adolescence. But when you have this condition, which we're confronted with continually, then you're going to find, if you look in a certain way, that you are immersed in, life's growth is greased by a kind of rationalizing gibberish. It is always, if not the forerunner, the companion of that which is either going to shortly disappear, or the gibberish will continue until it becomes familiar. All right? Let me see if I can pull out some fast examples before we get into where it really belongs, of how it manifests itself within a person. Does everyone remember, it was 5 or 6 years ago, when citizens of our country were held hostage in Iran? It went on for hundreds of days. It was in the news constantly. And every time there was a report that perhaps they would be freed, that were worked out negotiations, then when it got down to the day that indeed they were going to be freed and flown home, national celebrations and covered in all the news services, immediately, it had already happened before, but immediately it became of instant significance, if you remember. The president assigned, and news networks and medias were interviewing psychiatrists, stating as a fact the kinds of traumas that these people were going to experience. The time they got home, the president was prepared, whether the people had been in the military or civilian lines of work that found them over there captive. The psychiatrists, people with credentials, people that the president apparently respected, said this sort of thing will probably haunt them the rest of their life. Many of these people need analysis from now on. But our government will be proud to do it. It's the least we can do. They flew the people home, they got on their planes, they threw a party, everybody ran and grabbed their wife or husband. Everybody said, I'd like to have a cold beer and a McDonald's. They all went home, and that was the last you heard of it. Now that's happened 4 or 5 times, variations of that in your lifetime. Another one, not quite as immediate, but in your lifetime over the last 25, 30 years, the various forms of so-called liberation. People with less than the majority view of sexuality. women's lib, anything you can think of. In the beginning, if you hear it from a certain viewpoint, it starts out and it almost sounds like some sort of gibberish. Now, let me go back to what I originally, the term was a kind of rationalizing gibberish. That if you listen from a certain viewpoint, now of course you can't be ordinary, because if you're ordinary, you might have been involved, you might have been wired up to be in one of these causes, and if such case, you didn't hear it as gibberish, it was the rallying cry. It was the kind of thing that you could sit around a coffee shop or a cellar, back at some little beer place at your college, and people begin to discuss some form of liberation. Or they'd be, let me just expand into a little more politics, a nuclear-free society. And there you sit at 19 years old, and you begin just to repeat something you had read off of a pamphlet, but passionately. And if one of your elders, somebody as old as maybe 22 or 23, sitting at another table, said, hey, could you guys hold it down? You wanted to preach a sermon, except everything you were going to say, in a sense, was rationalizing gibberish because it's something that you'd simply heard. And the kind of reaction you got from other people that you didn't notice was of the ilk of, you know, if I wanted a parrot, I'd go to a pet store and buy one. That there is among life's body itself, when it begins this gibberish, as always, there's got to be resistance, and other parts of life body always hears this new thing as being a kind of gibberish, of foolishness. And I was using the supposed idea of great traumas on these prisoners once they were released. How about just the whole idea of psychology and psychiatry? All of you, I assume, are well read enough to know the kind of thing, the kind of process that psychiatry, historically now, it's old enough that, as you know, they referred to one man for it as being the father of it, but if you read enough in college, just a little bit, apparently all the kind of ridicule he went through. And it's not over today. I pull him out and use him for as many examples, almost, I guess, as I do the Pope. But to many people today, perhaps your mother and father, some of that generation, if you went home now, and you're sitting around the table having a bite to eat, and they said something about, you remember your Aunt Stella, she got married again. That's the 5th time, my. And you suddenly said something about, well, do you realize Freud had this to say about some sort of unconscious feeling that Aunt Stella probably had for her father? She was probably secretly in love with him, or she was involved with penis envy. Let's assume most of your parents will go, what? I've passed up a new fishing boat to send you to college, and this is the kind of crap. Your Aunt Stella, you know, she's off. Your Aunt Stella is man hungry. Your Aunt Stella is just a bozo. She always has been. Don't give me this stuff about her father. You don't even know her father. To your parents, and many people, not just your parents, but they're people your age, that sort of thing just sounds like just gibberish. You'll find it in other areas that life is undergoing an attempted lateral expansion. Because I said the gibberish seems to continue until it either is abandoned, such as me calling it gibberish, for there to be even official, widespread conviction that these hostages were going to just be almost at the point of being irrational, plagued by all kinds of psychic demons from being held captive over there by those mad people for days and days and days and days, months. And they're going to come over here and step off the plane, they're just going to be shattered. All right, it turned out to be gibberish because they did some follow-up. I said you never heard of it. They did a little follow-up, and everybody just seemed to be just as fine as they could be. It was just all over, and that was the end of it. So in that case, this one example I pulled out of horizontal time, you see, what seemed to be the problem disappeared. So when it disappears, the gibberish seems to disappear. The other aspect of it that I mentioned, though, is something becomes familiar. And even though I could make up examples of people now still resisting, just ordinary people resisting the idea of Western psychiatry, by and large it is not resisted. You can get your PhD in it, you can be licensed to practice it. It's considered to be a real semi-scientific profession somewhere. And so now to the same degree that it is, by and large, accepted in this part of life's body, here in the Western world, then that same degree, then the majority of people no longer find it to be gibberish. Even if you swore that you had no particular interest or any great faith in psychiatry and that you've never been in analysis, and you can't imagine anybody reasonable who would go into analysis, still, it is now a part of your hardwired vocabulary. Without you analyzing it, it is now familiar to you, even though, as I said, you may disclaim any particular interest in the same way that you might say, oh, I would not own a Ford automobile, anything made by Ford. You may have that sort of feeling towards psychiatry, but it is now no longer gibberish. It is something that's there. Let me refine one point before we get into individual people. Another way it happens is you'll have a group of people that are apparently being led in some direction, and apparently they're always led by a person, a leader. There appears to be a leader and a group of followers. There appears to be showbiz and the audience. The person apparently doing the leading is driven to go into some form of behavior that constitutes a lateral change for the person doing it or the group. And they immediately fall into this kind of rationalizing gibberish. This doesn't sound familiar enough? What if you'd been out there wandering around, fighting off enemies, been in slavery? One guy had been leading, it seemed to be all right, and he goes off and he disappears up the mountain, and he comes back and he said, a bush talked to me. Not just an ordinary bush, it was a God bush. Plus it got hot. Talk about heat. It got hot and burned. And look here, see these big tablets? It wrote them down and gave them to me, this burning bush. Now it's no longer funny. Nobody looks at it as gibberish in this part of the world. In many other parts of the world, that this is some sort of story. This is something that's, whether you absolutely agree with the background of the story, it is not gibberish. It was gibberish until it became familiar from one viewpoint of life's body. If things are going to change in that direction, if it is not simply going to be abandoned, you need to see that this kind of apparently rationalizing gibberish helps push along change as it would be seen laterally, as it would be seen in our great two-dimensional, so-called three-dimensional world. It's as though it is a kind of grease. Now remember, this is not all the way across the board in the triaxial brotherhood. The people involved in a certain way do not see it as gibberish. They may say, it's unfamiliar to me, it's a new teaching, it's a new aspect of psychiatry, sociology, this is a new aspect of my religion, but it's not gibberish. And it doesn't take just the hardwired distractors of that group to call it gibberish. You could get into the group that might be normally oblivious, unseen by this group, and you ask them, pointed out, what is this? And they'd say, the best I can make out of it is gibberish. It's foolishness. They seem to be trying to rationalize something that, as far as I can tell, has no meaning. In other words, if we went back, we're brought up to date, that some man had a group of followers that was supposed to be a spiritual endeavor, and he goes away and he disappears for 72 days, and he comes back and he says that he stepped into a cosmic closet wherein he was whisked to an 11-dimensional black hole, and the guide spoke to him on the basis of an inverted AC electrical current, and what he had to say now could only be done on the basis of a new version of the Morse code, wherein he puts his finger against your eardrum and taps out something. If you weren't a part of this group, you would say, that's gibberish. If you were wired up to be an opponent, that you were pitted against those kind of people, of course, you don't have to know who they were. All I got to do is mention them and describe them to you. And if we had a group of 100 people here, there'd be approximately 33 of you, as soon as I described this group, and said, somebody's doing this right now. Now I'm thinking about inviting him down here. Or I want to send some of you, I want to send you all out to meet him. And you were just regular, you're working at line level consciousness, approximately 33 of you would be pitted against this man already. If I didn't tell you anymore, I didn't tell you how big he was, how old he was, what color his hair was, or I didn't tell you whether he was a man or a woman, fat or skinny, stupid, had a lisp, one leg, whether he was undergoing right now bowel transplants or anything terrible. Just as soon as I started talking, approximately 33 of you would be pitted against him. You don't know why. You don't ever think about it until after the fact. If I said, well, why is it? If I said, all right, who wants to go? Or who absolutely just don't want to go? And 33 of you said, I don't. And I said, why? Of course, then you get in to remember how you explain the catered affair. That's right, you. Why don't you want to go? And you go, oh, well, I decided a long time ago, anybody's going to talk to me about unseen forces, things that they can't show me, about going into black holes, to me, that's foolishness. That is just religion revisited, and I want no part of it. That's why. That wasn't why. That was a kind of rumbling in life's body that came out through you, but that wasn't why. You took what life was feeling and thinking in part of its triaxial community as you again. You took it as being you without any analyzation until somebody, some other parts of life's body, turned you and said, well, exactly why don't you want to go? Then this catered affair, you suddenly remembered, is not simply a catered affair. I called for this. I phoned it in. Years ago, I decided what was on my menu and what wasn't. And this is the kind of crap that is not on my menu. Thank you, no thanks, leave me out, okay. Besides those that would be immediately pitted against this fictitious man and his group I just made up, another 33 of you, of course being the obvious, if you were ordinary, would be wanting to say, where is he, where is he? You know, when can I get a plane? That's more like it. We'll leave those people go. The other 33, you know, when I said, who wants to go? And 33 raised their hand. I said, who don't want to go? 33 raised their hand. Then, if I was going to carry this further, I'd say, all right, I counted 33 of you didn't raise your hand either way. Now, come on. You either want to go or you don't want to go, right? And 33 of you go. You would be the ones to this group. You'd be a part of the triaxial unseen great brotherhood, to which they would be oblivious, and vice versa. But if I said, all right, wait a minute. All right, 33 of you, evidently you're not sure whether you want to go or not. Of course, that's not the way you feel, but if I said, 33 of you, you're not sure whether you want to go or not. Let me ask you this. If you got no immediate feeling about the guy, how does it sound to you on the surface? You might not be as astringent in your vocalization of your feelings and thoughts as the 33 that were automatically pitted against my fictitious person. But if you were pressed, the 33 would say something like, well, you didn't tell me enough. I don't know what the guy is. I guess I have to see him. But I'll tell you this. If you give me a fair representation of what he said, happened, and what he believes, it's gibberish. He's either putting you on, he was drunk, it's allegorical, but taken at face value, that's gibberish. 2/3 of the great unseen triaxial brotherhood, a mechanical man, is represented by the 100 people that I said I might be addressing. 1/3 of them would automatically feel aligned to it, no matter what it was. If I changed the story, it'd be a different 33, be aligned to it. Then 66, of course you notice I'm leaving out the smaller number since I don't have to deal with that. All right, 66 and 2/3 would feel, even though you'd be actually in two different camps of the great unseen triaxial brotherhood of mechanical man, 66 and 2/3 of you would feel as though what I had described was gibberish. A attempted rationalization. The guy is up to something. He's going to try to fleece the people. He just simply wants a following. He's just taking some story he read somewhere from the old Greeks or somebody, and he's tried to turn it into some kind of up-to-date cosmological scientific happening using different terminology. It's gibberish, and he's attempting to rationalize something. If it does not disappear, if it becomes a living part of life's body long enough for it to be remembered, for it to be any part of recorded history for a length of time, it was a precursor of the change, and it was necessary, and the gibberish ceases to be gibberish, and that which apparently is a kind of rationalization ceases to be. There was, I can't resist, I'll make it a little more specific, a real quick one. There was a kind of would-be spiritual rebel that I saw just out in the ordinary world that had trouble with the organization that he originally was with. A fairly horizontal, legitimate, spiritual organization. They more or less threw him out. He hung around for years, almost as though he was trying to develop his act, trying to get up his own following. Now, I'm just telling you, I'm just giving you a fast and the way it appears, but here is a prime example of mine about the 11th dimension black hole in a cosmic closet. And I saw this fellow start to develop a little following on his own, got bigger and bigger, and as is very common when it takes on life, you got to remember, it starts falling into the employment of, you remember who? Factory D. Also remembering that D does not simply stand for destruction. That D is in charge of a kind of stabilization, so that growth, so that change in life's body does not run away. That conservatives are not all reactionary in the pejorative sense. Not that they are in charge or attempting to destroy and to stand in the way of all change. Part of it is just a different view. You got to be able to have the three different viewpoints simultaneously to see that's not always in some form of destruction. It's in a kind of stabilization. It's a kind of governor to keep things from getting out of hand. So, the fellow reached the point that he ceased being a part of life's body. He thought that he was getting messages from God, or if he was you people, he would think that he was thinking these things. I'm just telling you that life had all this use it could just out of one guy, and he developed hundreds or 1,000 people that now showed up to his little spiritual thing. And suddenly, as is very common, he felt a desire, obviously, to become part of the establishment. But they'd thrown him out, and he had to apparently run off and kind of rebel and stick his tongue out, like, well, I didn't want to be part of you people anyway. But then he came up with a form of dress that was almost a mockery of this religious outfit that threw him out. When I mockery, he didn't mean it. But simply taking the garb of this particular religion and changing a little bit, and then he went on, to the best of my knowledge, I was aware of it, for over a year, defending to his congregation why he had now adopted this garb, and how he knew that many people now was laughing, ridiculing, the forces of evil was trying to say that he should not have done this. And I can assure you, I wasn't there personally, but I was aware of what was going on. Out of the hundreds of people that heard him go through this for a year, it didn't even hardly fit this category. It did, but I'm just telling you, it was down, holding on by its fingernails. Because I can assure you, I could just simply, I knew what was going on, I could feel it. Leave it at that. That almost none of his followers had any interest in this. He simply showed up one day in a garb that was sort of a satire of what the original church garb was, with this message that the guides now wanted him to in some way stand out in life and to represent the new course of religion as it should be, the new message from the guides. And he knows that this will not be understood, and I know how this is going to make all of you feel bad, and some of you are going to react to it in a negative way. I assure you, it just barely met this minimum that most of the people went, you know, who cares, get on with it. And he spent over a year engaged in a kind of gibberish until it became familiar. But in this case, not familiar to the other people. It had to become familiar to him. If we were playing psychological games, if I was simply an 11th dimension psychiatrist, then I could say, as many people in ordinary route of life might say, was he was engaged in a kind of fear and apprehension of undertaking new behavior, and therefore he had to rationalize it and explain himself, and it took the fucker a year to do so, when nobody else cared. But he continually, week after week, would decry the forces of evil, the spirits of destruction from those great caverns of hell and damnation, who said he should not adopt this kind of dress that made him stand out in public. So when he walked out in public now, he couldn't just put on a business suit. Now he walked out and people knew that he was a man of religion, where they could scoff, where they could ask him, where did you get such an outlandish outfit? What is this? This is not, that looks awfully like certain church, but it's not. What have you done? Who are you? But I'll prevail, to God's be willing. Week after week, and nobody cared. Just trust me, they didn't. There wasn't much of life resisting this. But he's obviously playing some part because he had to feel the resistance for a long period of time, and he's still operating. And he seems to have more followers than the last time I saw him. And now he is familiar with it. It's never mentioned. He dresses like this, and that's it. But notice to him, so I was trying to drag this down, there's always some of the resistance from life itself. You got to remember that, but also remember when I've tried to drag you to the point that you can see the kinds of examples wherein life produces its own resistance, that everything is operating on a triaxial basis. It also manifests itself in an individual. And here's a case, if we were talking in pseudo-psychological terms, I guess they would say he kept projecting his uncertainty, his fear, the possible embarrassment he was going to feel about this. He kept, I think psychologists and psychiatrists would say, he kept projecting it out to others. He did in the name of religion, forces of evil. But it was a kind of embarrassment. And he had to engage in this kind of rationalizing gibberish until he was familiar with it, until he became comfortable with it. And now it's never mentioned. And I can assure you now that if you walked up and caught him somewhere and you said, where did you get that outlandish outfit? You might as well be squirting water guns at mallards. Wouldn't bother him a whit now, I assure you. He could spit and laugh at your attempted criticism. And of course, he has other explanations. It is now no longer gibberish to him. It is the familiar. Well, now let's abandon the wonderful world of examples apparently out there to which everyone can go ha-ha. Can anyone see, and I'm speaking to people who might be interested in this, not to the world, can any of you people see that involved with this, you are in a constant state of adolescence? Can any of you see that your life has been a series and will continue to be a series, if you're actively involved with attempting this, a series of a continuing kind of preceding, rationalizing gibberish that goes on within you before any change happens? It happened in your life. It happened, as I started out telling you, reminding you. Psychology even says ordinary people, ordinary psychology and ordinary people, that teenagers seem to go through this kind of rebellious period where they seem to be seeking their own voice, trying to find out who I am. Not only seeking their voice, but trying to live through all the hormones making their, especially the boys, their voice go crack, you know, when they're trying to be cool. Of course, that's not, they're talking about developing your own personality, but finding your own voice. Everyone's been through that, male and female. Almost, well, without any meaningful exception, when people reach the age that they found their voice, when people reach the age of majority, when you became a little man or a little woman, that is when your age of adolescence, horizontally, laterally, stopped. But vis-a-vis this kind of activity, regarding the possibility of ever being able to have new thoughts that would need to lead to new feelings, your adolescence was over. You henceforth took everything that life feels, everything that life thinks, and you take it as being you. And you then operate at that speed. You operate in the time zone that is post-adolescence for your generation, for your peers, for when you were born. People, in fact, without understanding it, without analyzing it this way, of course, since I made all this up, the maps of it, that is, the maps of it. I don't scare you new people. I didn't actually just make all this up. Does anybody notice how closely sometimes Reverend Jerry Falwell looks like William F. Buckley turned inside out? Scratch that from the tape, at least it dated. People, without analyzing this way, seek to avoid being a part of some form of gibberish. They don't want to be exposed to it. Once you get a little age on you, many people, by the time you get 20 or 21, ordinary people, they do not want to be around teenagers anymore. It's just all gibberish. They don't understand what life's about. Here I am, I'm 21, I finished college. Immediately, I got married my junior year, and I've already got a kid, and I'm out here working, trying to pay the mortgage. I sit around with these kids, just a couple of years younger than me. They're just nuts. They don't understand anything that life's about. I guess I was a little foolish 2 years ago when I was 19, but good grief, I couldn't have grown up this much in 2 years. I was not that foolish. And it annoys people. And of course, many people are wired up that this degree of intolerance to gibberish increases. That is, you get to be 50 and it's almost unbearable. Not only 19-year-olds, 30-year-olds, they don't know anything. Even your own kids. Now you are 60 and they're 40. They're nuts. Everything they say, they just gibberish. They're still trying to support liberal causes. They won't talk to me about Freud and psychology. It's foolishness. All right, internally, it's back to that. Although this does not ordinarily happen, if you can hear me right quick without me trying to make up a wide range of examples, which would take a wide range to come up with one, take me too long. Although it doesn't happen, there is a built-in mechanism to stop you and your own internal voices that you think of as being you, the sweat glands, the pores in the last blood system, wherein the energy comes out and it sounds like your voices. It sounds like you talking to you. Although it doesn't happen, there is a built-in mechanism to resist any kind of gibberish getting through life's system and coming out in you instead of other people. You know, other idiots, people younger than you, people of different religions, people of different races, people on the other side of the world. I mean, they can talk, they claim to have a language, but what they're saying is gibberish. That's all it is. There is a built-in mechanism not to let any of that. Your voices don't ever talk to you about gibberish. I mean, there are plenty of people that say, you know, my mind's driving me nuts, I have bad dreams, but people do not call it gibberish. It is not gibberish, it's me. I don't like all the things I think about. I don't like some of the dreams, some of the nightmares that I have. I mean, it's my parents' fault, without any doubt. But it's not looked on as gibberish. To pursue this kind of activity, you've got to be able to develop, encourage, nourish, recognize new thoughts. And this is the way it normally goes. This is one description. But it appears to be as like new ways that you think, a new flash of looking at something that then seems to lead to a new feeling, which has always been expressed by ordinary people that accidentally have the nervous system ignited in an unusual way. They can't really describe what happened, as I've told you over and over, and the books are full of it. But they are left with this remembrance, this great enthusiasm for the feeling it led to, generally referred to as a mystical experience, a superconscious experience. But they cannot really tie it into any kind of yellow circuit activity. All they can do is fall back upon, from our viewpoint, inoperative, unprofitable repetition. That is, all they can say is, I'm not sure what happened, but I mean, well, this much is obvious since I'm Jewish. what I had was a Jewish mystical experience. I understood something Jewish in a new way. I'm a Christian. Jesus, I'm almost certain. I mean, it was such an experience, and even today, I'm just almost overwhelmed to remember it. But I'm almost certain I looked around the corner of my backyard. I'd been reading the Bible all afternoon. I'd been fasting. I'd had diarrhea. And I looked around, and I saw somebody turn around the corner. At first, I thought it was my uncle. But I believe now that I thought, no, it looks just like Jesus on that black velvet. And then, I don't know, I felt so good since then. The point being, you've read enough. Some of you have had little experiences you thought, if not mystical, enough of you have had drug experiences in the past, that the feeling after the fact, that you have had some kind of good feeling, that one time when you got hold of some good drugs, or at one time you were part of a commune and you guys fasted and you tried to chant some holy prayer, and at one time, one night, you did have an experience. 3 or 4 of you did. And even now, when you think back to it and you feel good about it, there's a reality to it. The feeling. But you cannot ask yourself, in what way was the yellow circuit? In what way were my thought processes tied up in it? You can't. It was a catered affair. If you're ordinary, you might go back and say the kind of things I was trying to make up an example. You might say, well, it's a little vague, but I remember some more of the people, they said that they saw Jesus, they saw Buddha, and I'm pretty sure I did. And he said, moderation in all things except supreme awareness. Now, he said that to me, or maybe he said to somebody else, but it was like we all heard it. The point is, you're back to this ability that the system has, the way life uses memory to recycle energy, that although it was catered and you don't know what happened, you don't know what especially happened in your yellow circuit, you do know you felt good. You know that right now you feel good remembering it. But you have got to fall back in the hands of this ordinary reconstruction of memory. In a sense, you've got to make up something. It's just a crude way of putting it. To come up with any yellow circuit activity involved with this. But what I'm telling you, and enough of you have now had experiences with it through doing some of these tasks in conjunction with things I've talked about and then things that you begin to see for yourself, this is a two-dimensional description because it sounds linear. But this is the way it seems. There's a kind of new thought that these experiences you've had that felt as though my whole system, my awareness, in some way got ignited, got set on fire, something connected in a way that never had. Enough of you have had these experiences now, unusual places, driving your car, sitting in a public restroom, about to pick up 2 Twinkies, and you turn around and you looked and you saw somebody, or you looked and you saw somebody and you saw your voices about to talk about them, and it was a new yellow circuit activity. It sounds linear, but it's immediately. I would say simultaneously, but you can't put that together with linearly. You had a feeling, which is what seems to make it all worthwhile. Besides understanding something new, it's the I can't believe it. It's the hello. But it appears to be linear. That is, that some yellow circuit activity, it is having thoughts in you, it is having yellow circuit activity in you that was not natural to the time, to the triaxial brotherhood of what life was thinking in the area where you normally stand, in the area where you are wired up to work in life's body. That the things that life's body thinks where you are, it would have never thought. Had you ever thought it? Was it all that strange? No, I could put it together. I could put it in words. And of course, many of you do. You send me up notes about, hey, I think I saw, or I saw so-and-so. I hate to say it, but I saw that it looked like blah, 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 blah. It might be just 7 or 8, 10 words. But I get a much expanded message from your 6 or 8 words that apparently yellow circuit activity led to new feelings. But you have got to have, this is just a temporary description, but you have got to have this kind of lineal, this apparently lineal activity, or all you're left with are these feelings of great goodwill. You're left with what seemed to be a new feeling for you, that I felt happier now about humanity. I do feel better than I did before this happened. Before I went to the commune and that night when we had this great experience having to do with Buddha talking to us, I think. I have never felt, I swear, I have never felt as hostile toward people since that night. And there could be a grain of validity to that. Life does use that, but that is not what this is about. That is insufficient. You will stay within the great unseen triaxial brotherhood of mechanical man. To what you seem to have felt anew is still subject to your feelings being pitted just automatically against a third of humanity. Your sensation that a third of life's body, that is humanity, seems to be aligned with your feelings. Then there's 33 that you never see. But if they were pointed out, they just don't seem to fit. They're not part of the present scenario. They're not part of your spiritual activity. The gibberish goes on before any real change. And as I said, if you could see it in a certain way, I could say it as simultaneous. It's as though your own circuitry and the yellow parts of it cannot comprehend, cannot deal with things that's never dealt with before. It's as though the yellow circuit says, as I keep hinting and stating to you, I've never thought this before, therefore I can't think it. Which is what it amounts to. And when it seems to happen and it says I can't think it and yet it does, voila, a mystical experience. Oftentimes it happens very quickly and may be gone almost as quickly, that all of this is immersed in a kind of gibberish. If the yellow circuit hasn't thought it before, it can't think it now. And if the voices in you have not ever stated this, how are they going to state it now? How are they going to know what to say next unless they've already said it before? That's been one part of many of the tasks I have given, and some of the things that you should have pursued on your own, is you simply realize, I think the same thing over and over and over. I can read books, I can listen to people give lectures, but with just a minimal amount of apparent some room to maneuver around a little bit, that maybe when I'm reading the book and I read over certain passages that seem to intrigue me, I can read them over and over and sit there. It's almost as though I can follow something the author's saying that I'd never thought about exactly in that way. But it's as though when the heat is over, you're like our good old chemical compounds out there, it all snaps back into things you'd already thought before. You may now attribute it to this author. You may now try and show how well read you are, and you may be talking to someone and say, oh, as Dr. So-and-so said, as Minister So-and-so, as Rabbi So-and-so said in his book, and you come out with this, except it has now fit into your own catering menu to a certain degree. That may not be exactly what he said. It's obviously not exactly what was meant through him. It's now snapped, and it's something you've already thought, and you put it in somebody else's mouth. Or else you find somebody else that apparently said almost the same thing you had thought, and you rely on him to support you. I guess I should go ahead, since I seem to be so brave at times. I'd like to point out to you that in a sense, I am engaged in gibberish. I've tried to use a little more refined description in the past, e.g., saying that I was somewhat like a jazz musician, using standards, that is, old songs everybody knows, like in your case, let's say Yesterday by the Beatles. Now start playing Yesterday. And everybody can hum along, you know the words. Then by the time I get halfway through the first verse, though, I have begun to ad-lib. But I still for a while, and then periodically I seem to come back, seem like I come to my senses and come back to the melody a little bit. I may be 34, 116 bars down the road from where you lost it, and I seem to begin to improvise, and it has no relationship to Yesterday. But then I realize how far removed the general hearing of my audience is. Now I seem to go back. That sounds a little better, this kind of continual improvisation, but based upon standard songs, based upon known melodies, in reference or using as a springboard known lyrics and tempos that are not all that foreign or exotic. That sounds a little better than saying I engage in gibberish. And yet, a part of what I have to do is gibberish. All the so-called spiritual heroes you might have, as I was using the little story of Moses, you can look at as a form of gibberish. Really. Now you may have read enough of the so-called recollected sayings of Buddha. You may have read them enough that, to you, that's, Buddha's all right. If he actually said all that stuff, he was okay in my book. But at the time he said it, I assure you that a large part of life's body found it to be gibberish. It normally takes 66 2/3 molecules of life's body, or at least a certain part of life's body, of life cells, to find this other part to be gibberish for it to be remembered. There has to be that kind of resistance. Now, there were other people engaged in a form of gibberish who were contemporaries with Buddha, but you never heard of them, and I'll tell you the truth. I hadn't either. Because remember, the gibberish is either a prelude to that which is about to wane and be forgotten, or it's going to be gibberish until it becomes familiar, accepted. Buddha happened to become accepted. But there's a whole bunch of people around talking gibberish. Who remembers them? They died. Yesterday's news. Nobody remembers anything about them. All of this is a kind of form of gibberish to start with. One thing that it should encourage, or I was trying to encourage by bringing it up this way tonight, is that if you are not subject to continue to think and thusly to feel, as it appears linearly for the time being, if you're not subject to what in your case would be inappropriate repetition, improper repetition, you should be able to get a quick glimpse. As disruptive as the word gibberish may seem, you've got to realize that you have got to be attuned to. You've got to have the ability to turn on your receiver up here and be able to turn in some gibberish, or else you're going to think and to feel the same things forever. It'll be non-gibberish. It may be boring. It may be, well, obviously unprofitable. It's going to be non-nourishing, but at least, by God, it won't be gibberish. That wherever you are in the world, literally and figuratively, you can at least get your receiver with no problem. You just think it takes a little effort, but you can turn your receiver wherever you are in the world and pick up Radio Free America, Radio Free Fred or Mary. You can be in a foreign environment. You can be in a structure practicing a different religion. You can be around people suddenly, thrown amongst people who apparently have a different social viewpoint toward life, a different political viewpoint, and it's gibberish. The damn people are dressed up, they're wearing shoes, but these people are nuts. And them staying there, putting their fingers in their vest and talking about all these important matters, they don't know it, they're idiots. This is gibberish. And you turn in Radio Free Fred or Mary. And what a relief Suddenly to hear the Beatles, to hear the Boston Pops, to hear our great president. Of course, what you're hearing is the noises native to where you were born and the part you're playing in the great unseen tracks of brotherhood of mechanical man. So you're always able to pick up non-gibberish, to say the very least. As I pointed out, it's almost impossible to entertain gibberish. It just apparently is out there, other people do. But you, that is you and your partnership, you know gibberish when you hear it. You don't have to analyze it. Gibberish is gibberish by God, and it is rejected out of hand, and you immediately fine-tune. You're back on the wavelength, thinking non-gibberish, and being able simultaneously to recognize gibberish. You've got to, of course, have non-gibberish up here to be able to correctly identify gibberish out there, right? Well, let me carry the apparent lineal process a little bit further, since many, many of you experience this. And of course, many, many of you keep wanting to know how to increase it. Seems to be the problem for you for a while. When you can have this kind of new circuit yellow activity, now remember I'm still in this apparent lineal description. And any lineal description, always remember, is lacking severely. But I'm trying to keep gibberish right now to a minimal amount so that this makes a little literal sense. Not lateral, literal. This kind of new thinking, yellow circuit activity, apparently brings about an almost simultaneous new feeling, blue circuit activity. But then all of this seems to culminate in the production of some kind of new energy. With you, with people that just have it accidentally, as I put it. Thinking, yellow circuit activity apparently brings about an almost simultaneous new feeling, blue circuit activity. But then all of this seems to culminate in the production of some kind of new energy. With you, with people that just have it accidentally, as I put it to you. Those that have these apparently accidental ignitions. People who accidentally, in life's body somewhere, life always being the roaming, rough and tumble, devil-may-care kind of guy it is, the people have this, and even they feel it. They have such a burst of energy that a person that has a 2-second flash of this writes a 750-page fucking book. That's how much energy it had. He gets through with a book, he may have written it in 2 days after he had the experience. This is very common. He sits down as fast as he can write with his little charcoal or licking his finger, and he writes this book. And then just he's drained, that's it. He never again writes anything else. He can't even explain this. All he can do is try to take care, credit for it and collect a few royalties. But the energy just seems to be unbelievable. It just came from nowhere. It came from the experience. All right. As far as I know, thank God, none of you have written a 700-page book about it, but many, many of you have had this feeling and experiences that you want to tell me about or I see on your face, and you mentioned, I assume you knew it wasn't necessary, but you mentioned that it's like you have discovered a whole new source of energy, and it kept you up maybe several days, or it seemed to keep you running. It seemed to renew what you thought was your real need for this, and then it went away. But let me point out to you, as long as you could hold it, you should be able to be a kind of objective projector or imaginer of what having access to this kind of unusual energy, of being able not to think and to feel the inappropriately repetitious, that if you could plug into or have access to this kind of discovered energy, look out upon life, look out upon the mirror of yourself, and I would suggest to you that you would find a cure for at least count them, maladies. Never correctly diagnosed until this time, and since I now have my full Doctor of Medicine diploma from a school that I don't care to divulge at this time while they're still in litigation. Just trust me, take my word for it. I don't know why they picked, it was the dictator, it was the president's brother-in-law. I trust the man, he was the dean of the school. At any rate, 3 maladies not only recognized that this kind of access to the energy would cure. One is stone face. Second is junk body. And the third one is mud mind. I'll admit to you, I didn't get that from this school that I graduated from last week. Of course, I hadn't read all the books. I only was able to spend 2 weeks, or 12 years undergoing this rigorous bi-male study. But at any rate, I'm not sure what terms they use, but I have just described the general maladies of being alive, of being bored, being disgusted, not having the energy to do the very things even mechanical people believe that their voices, believe that their guides, believe that their better selves are telling them to do. Because have I not about covered it? I believe you have. Stone face is everywhere. Pick out the finest resort in the world. Go run there where people are living it up and look around. Go where the action is, you think. And what have you got? You got a whole bunch of. And along with that, or in addition to, and besides the stone faces, you find the junk bodies. And I don't mean just poor posture. If you remember at one time I described posture as an internal function, but not just simply poor posture. You know, it doesn't have to be just this. The poor posture is being hurt, is being sick, is apparently suffering. That is junk body. And along with it, the beliefs that it's possible not to be sick. It's possible to find the great ambrosia, that there is a secret food. If you don't eat it or drink it, it's a secret kind of food you hear. It's a secret word. It's a secret teaching. But until I find it, I'm stuck with junk body. You'll find that where the action is. Sometimes the leaders, apparently, of the action here and there. Those in charge of waving banners and whipping up the action, the shills for the house. Talking about a new day, a promised land. They're limping, they're coughing, not just physically, not just literally, but it's as though they are a exemplary manifestation of everyone's junk body, and it's accepted. It can even be used. My third malady, mud mind, I think that's self-explanatory. I don't see any need that I have to say anything other than mud mind. I guess that's as good a place to stop as any, and I was going to read some of your questions tonight and try and use some. One thing about gibberish, it's normally just as good a place to stop here as anywhere else. Sometimes I guess I don't try to hide it necessarily since it's not planned, but I guess sometimes you realize, even on the tapes, I just have to arbitrarily be running out of tape, or I've decided that's about as much as the average attention span will handle, and I just stop. But I could go on a long time about the gibberish and about that unpronounceable acronym. I can't resist a small attempt at a wrap-up, a reminder. Notice that you're not prepared to deal with gibberish. Well, it's normally accepted as gibberish, foolishness, of no consequence. That everything has to be serious, everything has to be reasonable. To you, it has to be linear lens progression, it has to apparently have a payoff, it has to have some basis, it has to have a history. Who said this? Where did it come from? Where is it written? How do you know it? Does anybody else believe this? Of course, your own wiring system has to react to it. Does it make any sense, or is it, in fact, gibberish? But notice, the whole world, and you kind of people especially, believe we're looking for new kicks. You think you're looking for new spiritual horizons, secret information, but at least the rest of the world believes they're looking for something new, on some fun. Sure, I'd like to learn something different. I'd like to feel something different. I'd like a new love affair. I'd like all kinds of things. That's just ordinary people. But they don't. We're not wired up for it. Gibberish is for children. New stuff is for teenagers. Having fun? Forget it. I'm grown. I'm above that. Oh, sure, I dream of it. I dream of it. But having fun? Listen, I got a wife and family. Having fun? Hey, I wear black ankle calf size socks, wingtip shoes. Don't talk to me about fun. I got a mortgage. That's what TV's for. That's what movies are for. You watch other people have fun. You read a book. Sure, I'd love to have fun, I guess. But hell, I got to go to work. I got to go home, go to bed so I can go to work. It is a built-in resistance to anything new, to anything different. It is a built-in resistance to gibberish. But gibberish precedes, even if it's a split second, precedes the ability to think in a new way, and then almost immediately, we're talking now about you people, not the ordinary world, is then you feel something that is new. And that's what reveals the source of what seems to be new energy. It'd be better put, many people's tried to describe, it's better put as the discovery of a different way to the source. But it seems as though suddenly you've got new energy. It does not come about without gibberish. It does not come about when you're operating at the same time, in the same time zone, as the great unseen triaxial brotherhood of mechanical man. If you're operating in the same time zone as life's body in general, at your time and place, it's too slow. If all you know is what life's general community knows, if you were, in fact, if we go back to this ridiculous anthropomorphic parallel, and we say, all right, you must be living sort of over in Liverville in life's body, and you're probably living in Spleen City, and you may discover that you, for instance, are living in Long Heights. Then I tell you that each one of those operates at a different speed. They operate in a different speed in your body. Your liver lives in a different time zone than your lungs do. So if some over here is living in Long Heights and some over here is living in Liverville, you're living in two different time zones. But your body as a whole is living in one time zone, right? Right. As far as you can see, as far as you can experience from your perspective now, all of life's body, the known universe, is operating in one overall time zone. Even if you don't see it, I'm telling you, that's the way it'll be. It's a fact, Jack. If you are operating yourself in that time zone, it's too late, Jake. You're too slow, Joe. The speed is not sufficient. That speed, and there's an overall life speed at which everyone is wired up, no matter who you are, what race you are, what religion you are. Right now, everybody is operating at a speed, and it may seem different than somebody right across the border, someone right across the pew from you. But right now, humanity is operating at an overall speed. And if you're overall, if you're operating at line level consciousness, If you're operating at the speed of the great unseen tracks of Brotherhood of Mechanical Man, that speed is too slow. That is, among other ways, that's one point that divides religions of all kinds, all times, all places from this kind of activity. Is that parts of life body that's satisfied with religion never understands that whatever seems to be this miraculous gibberish that's now turned into a mystical revelation, a mystical message, now that we got it and it sounds all right, the son of a bitch is so slow that you couldn't get to Cleveland with it. If you put a turbocharger on this teaching, you ain't going nowhere. And it's never understood because it is now serving a purpose. But it's now running at ground speed. It'll never get off the ground. They can take it to an airport. Christianity, Judaism, last year's redoing of Buddhism, anything that may have had any validity, that had any speed to it, once it has ceased to be gibberish, it's like taking a red wagon out there and you pushing it with your foot, and you may be out at an airport. You may get somebody foolish enough up in the control tower to give you clearance and say, go for it. You might even have somebody try to get in the wagon with you, and you both push. But you might as well face this. You ain't getting off the ground. Even if you had the general aerodynamic design, that you got you and a couple of other big fat people, and you laid down the wagon, and you did that. The point is, you're not going to get that wagon up at ground speed fast enough that the laws of aerodynamics would take you and that red wagon off the ground. When you reach the point that you're dealing with the familiar, which everybody's supposed to be doing, for most of life's body, then no matter what you do, no matter what you read, no matter what you apparently imagine, you're never going to get up to aerodynamic speed. You're not ever going to go anywhere. You can run around the airport. You can wear blisters on your toes. You can wear blisters on your brain, apparently, from reading about it and imagining about it. But it's not going to go anywhere. Does that give you any more, as if some of you need it, suspicion about how difficult this is? How difficult it is to do from your viewpoint, how difficult it is, if indeed it ever heads more in that direction, for me to do anything with this on a greater level. Because to do it on a greater level, I can't spend months and years speaking in a kind of improvisational gibberish and then jumping back and forth every few minutes, every few seconds, to where you think it's all right, I haven't lost my mind. Wait a minute, it is all right, it's not gibberish. Now you put it that way, made a joke out of it. Hey, I think I almost understood it. But then it was so fast, you're not sure, and now I'm back on to some more gibberish. If you're operating at the same time, in the same time zone as life in general, you're done for. That's it. You'll live out your days. You'll suffer from one or a combination of the following, of stone face and junk body and mud mind. Bored, confused, a little pissed. Unless you got a real good job of life. Of course, then you wouldn't be listening to this anyway. Then, if such people as have those real good jobs that are not particularly bored and excited to go and work in life's factory, it's just a good thing they don't even hear much of this. Because if ordinary people think it's gibberish, that's the parts of life body that finds its own self. Hey, that's beyond the point of gibberish. That's dangerous. I don't know what the hell it is, but that's dangerous. Because that is so far removed, it is so far in opposition. It almost turns a three-dimensional reality that's ordinarily unseen, it almost turns it into six. To where the people who hear something and disagree with it are opposed to their own disagreement to it. That's when you got trouble. And not just here in River City. You got trouble in Liverville, and etc. I remind you, I've given tasks before. Some of them were active, that affected behavior, and a couple, if you can recall, had to do with apparently trying to pull one of these yellow circuit explosions of operating at a different speed than just your immediate surroundings. But your immediate surroundings, my friends, is your own receiver. Your immediate surroundings can seem to be, in the first examples I give, the great out there, to move in at a different time than you normally move in relationship to what's going on out there. And now I tried to trick you some time ago into trying to move at a different speed in here to what you normally do. But it has to be an overall attempt. It has to be an overall continual, with some degree of success, of operating at a speed different from the time zone in which you live. If you don't, you're done for. You'll never reach airspeed. And you will continue to think, feel, behave is way down the line, but that's what, if you insist I throw it in the same old ways over and over and over and over. And if you think that that's going to lead anywhere, Jesus, I wish I was still in the aluminum siding business. I wish I still had the hobby of collecting suckers. I guess some of the people hearing this on tape like that, or figured I meant that seriously. Do any of you know, I guess some of you have met more would-be gurus and teachers than I have. Do you know it's almost impossible to find any of these people that were not either originally door-to-door salesmen, I'm serious, some of you may know it, or selling aluminum siding or Tupperware. Well, somebody said encyclopedias are these kind of mind control and hypnosis. And then it's like after years of it and up and down in their careers that suddenly had some sort of flash that they don't really want to go into. And now they're suddenly a guru. Well, yeah. Anyway, if any of you thought that my last comments that I was in some way giving away accidentally or on purpose something, it was a joke. Although I know some of you in the beginning have a short stick upon which to balance my humor, don't you? It's another joke to try and make you loosen up. It's just gibberish. Give me a break. All right. I was going to read some of the questions. I've used up so much damn time, I don't hardly have time for this. Well, I told you to watch it. Well, I got carried away. Is it possible for a whole period of one's past life to disappear? It seems to have happened to me. It seems in a sense that I have there's no real struggling with the recollection of my apparent past conditions, myself, other people. Seems to be no more recollections of great melodramas, possibilities unrealized, mistakes made. There just seems to be no great recollection of past outcomes and after effects. Is this possible? I have the ability not to step on good punchlines, but I still have some concern at times whether all the laughter and reaction of this crowd gets on the audio part of the tape. I should have left it where it was, but I just at times don't know that you people in getting us on tape at some other time or some other place had the real experience of this laughter, because I'll translate it. Is why I hate to sometimes to even comment. But is it possible is the question. I ask you, could somebody write the question and it not be possible? Is it possible for someone to engage in gibberish and not understand their own gibberish? Is it possible for someone to understand gibberish that I can translate? Because I translated, I didn't read it exactly. And it not have some meaning to them. Weighty questions, my friends. Is it possible even to get more than 3 pigs in a payphone booth? Could you say something else about what I guess one might call personal responsibility? It seems on nights that we meet and I'm a recipient of the kind of energy coming from you and the combined efforts of the people here. Much of what goes on seems so clear, but then back in the ordinary world, it seems impossible to sustain this kind of energy. And I wonder if in some way we have to learn how to generate this kind of energy that I seem to get here when I'm confronted with you in the group, and etc. Is there some something to do. This kind of question, I said, continually arises. And I've already answered that in either 8 or 26 ways tonight. But I'll point out again, you've got to be able to break out of the bonds of your own personal, impertinent repetition. That you people are correct without us getting into hooray for me. That varying from meeting night to meeting night, varying from person to person, that you seem to get some kind of energy of being here confronted with me doing this that's impossible to totally recreate by yourself. So that seems to be part of the habit forming, part of the addiction of this. That when things seem just right, you being here and listening to me and watching me do this seems to do something, and it may seem to carry over several hours after we meet. And oftentimes you attribute part of it to the other people here, which is not incorrect. But it seems obvious that you'd just be done for. There would not be this kind of energy if I disappeared, if I dropped dead. There is a reality to it, but you've got to be able to certain degrees, not to be an imitation of me, but you've got to be able to find a way that you do not, first off, putting it back to what seems to be the linear progression, so I can put it in words, that you've got to be able, in the yellow circuit, the highest one, the best that we can do for life, the best place for you to start with you, the easiest place, of course, is start with behavior. It's right, everybody quit drinking, don't smoke, and stand on one foot when I'm talking to you. And don't ever think evil of somebody that has a different hat size than you. The place to start, if you're going to be in a hurry, and you got to be in a hurry or you're too late, is up here. That's how humanity has developed in life. That is how life is developing, if there were a parallel in its body. It's up to the nervous system and up to this thing that makes us mortal, that makes you something other than a gerbil. If you do not break out of that personal, impertinent repetition of this, to where in a sense that you can formulate, that you can force you and your own internal partnership into a kind of attempted, at least ersatz in the beginning, gibberish, that you do not look upon life and let these voices in here that you think are you. You do not let life's slow moving, for your purposes, it's slow-moving speed right now, that you do not let life's general thoughts be your thoughts. I don't care what they are. Whether you're picking it up right now that your thoughts are what some neo-Nazi is thinking, or whether your thoughts are what some poet about to win the Nobel Prize is thinking. They're still life's thoughts, and they will not help you. You should know that. If they did, every time you read something by a famous poet, you'd become better if you did become what you eat. And every time you eat something that would seem to be unprofitable, the ravings of some hostile maniac, then you would eat it and get sick, or you'd spit it out and you'd be a better person. You'd understand that. That does not happen. That is not the way it happens. Until, in a sense, that you can develop your own kind of gibberish, that you can look upon what is going on, which is the same thing as look upon what you think is you looking on. But if you got to have it two ways, you can look upon what seems to be going on and look upon what seems to be you looking at what's going on, and not see it and think about it in the same repetitious manner that you can almost look at it and be a kind of 4D Daffy Duck, that what you do has almost no relationship to that crude cartoon background, back when Daffy Duck used to amount to something, back when it had a mystical message, back when they made cartoons like God intended them. A little more humor, folks. Back when Daffy Duck seemed to portray a living, walking non sequitur, that no matter what happened, he was just humanity, even though he was a great world of duckdom. He seemed to be all of humanity's voice for the absolutely irrelevant, the formal mode of gibberish. if you can do that with yourself, and what seems to be yourself looking upon that which seems to be not yourself, you are encouraging those moments that the yellow circuit can lead almost instantaneously to new feeling. And you find that there is a way that you can encourage this new kind of energy. You seem to get it from me, which is valid up to a point. But remember, if I buy that boat and move to Nassau, you got to do it yourself. Dogs and cats, etc., do not seem to be into suffering, despite there being little more to them than a red circuit. Well, here's what the person means. Although, according to your kind of descriptions, such animals, dogs and cats, being a red circuit, they don't seem to suffer, yet when I see what seems to be red circuit-centered people seem to suffer a lot. What's up? Now, their observation is not necessarily true without condition, but let's take what the person said, that they look upon what seems to be red circuit-employed people, physically centered people, he says, seem to suffer a lot, that particular group. Let's just accept that. It's not necessarily true. But then if we're going to look upon animals, such as dogs and cats, I could throw in warthogs and elephants, they don't seem to suffer. What's up? Well, you cannot mortally suffer without a yellow circuit. You can't suffer as a human unless you've got the same equipment as a human, unless you have got the same wiring possibilities as a human. And what the person is saying, pointing out as suffering, cannot be done without a yellow circuit. Now, I could do a whole lot more with that. But how about you can't do it with yellow circuit? And remember what I was also pointing out tonight, there seems to be non-repetitious activity in the yellow circuit leading, for a few people, not humanity, but then leads to this almost instantaneous new feeling, the so-called mystical experience, the so-called feeling that people have of, hey, I suddenly understood we're all brothers, we're all sisters. I right then felt as though I could grab the whole world and hug them and kiss them. I mean, people that I ordinarily would hate, people I would ignore, people I would step over. If I could have got my hands on the whole world right then, I would have grabbed them in a hug, I'd have wrestled them to the ground, I'd have rolled down a hill in the dirt, I would have laughed. God, I wish I could bring it back. And I had such energy. I was almost tempted to run out and try and hug everybody in the whole world. And geez, now I can't hardly get up off the sofa to change the TV channel. You can't suffer like that with a yellow circuit. And then you can't, how about the obvious? I say obvious. You can't suffer like that without a yellow circuit. Plus, you can't imagine not suffering like that without the yellow circuit to know it suffers that way. You would not know you are suffering without the yellow circuit. Without the yellow circuit, you couldn't say, it seems to me a lot of people suffer, and I see other creatures like dogs and cats that don't seem to suffer like we do. Without the yellow circuit, you couldn't point that out. Without the yellow circuit, you couldn't say, what's up? Without the yellow circuit, you couldn't hear me answer whether it seems to be reasonable, oblique, or gibberish. Yes, I know. Well, all right, but I'm going to have to go think about that. Me and my yellow circuit will have to take that under the great AV, as they say in the great University of Alabama. I'll have to take that under advisement. Some of these I'm giving short responses, but that does not indicate any short shrift to the answers or to the questions. Or some of you have written me from other times and other places that pick up these tapes. Sometimes I write you back and sometimes I don't. But if I don't write you back, that is a response in general to what you ask or to a specific question. But when I say that is a kind of response, I don't mean that that means that your question doesn't deserve a response. It is not any pejorative indication as to any feeling or thought I may have about your question. more often than not, I respond literally to someone's written questions that see these tapes. But at times I do not, and if I do not, it was a response. Having cleared that up, how is it that men alone, that live alone, seem to be so disheveled? I hope you people will take me here all this laughter. The question's longer than that, but it's from a woman. I'll give you a hint. I'd be a little more encouraged if it was from a man, but you can't have everything. But a woman points out, and I assume all you women know, you leave men alone, a man by himself, put three guys together. You know, Neil Simon in The Odd Couple, the man's playing around with actual reality. You put a bunch of guys together and it's going to look like a pig pen. And the person is sort of asking, what's up? Could I simply point out, which the person even asked enough, I got a feeling they suspected somewhere verbally along these lines, could I just ask you to consider the possibility of continuing genetic murmurs from yesterday? That left to their own devices, the unsaid part of this is that women do not live that way. Forgetting that notion of right or wrong, or good old horizontal ideas about, well, you know how men are. I suggest to you that it's actual mumblings from the DNA of men as opposed to women, the kinds of purposes that it may have been serving for life's own benefit, for women to live in a certain way in particular areas such as this, in ways that might have been almost irrelevant to men and the duties they were serving, the functions they were serving for life's overall health at one time. And it's still here. The observation is fairly well up to date, but I suggest to you there can be genetic mumblings from yesterday, and yesterday goes all the way back, for at least for your benefit, goes all the way back 6,000 years from tonight. A little over 6,000, but we won't split hairs. And so 6,000 years, you've got that range to deal with these kind of questions of why is it that men seem to do so-and-so, women so-and-so, or why is it, any question you ask, why is it that large groups of people seem to be inclined to do such and such, and then another group that seems to be almost as reasonable seems to do something else. You got to remember the time zones. You have got to remember the speed at which life operates in your body. Then imagine the different speeds available to operate in life's body if you look upon individual conditions such as men opposed to women, the Greeks as opposed to the Romans, the Catholics as opposed to the Protestants right now. Anybody you want to pick out, you as opposed to your mother, you as opposed to your second husband. How is it that two people can get to a state where practically any discussion on any subject almost immediately begins to sound to both people as though the other is personally insulting, impugning, or maligning them? All right, we got enough laughter that enough of you hear that. It's quite true, and the person didn't go into any more detail, but this can be now two people living together. Maybe over a long period of time, perhaps the rest of their life. They do point out a little more that it seems to be limited almost to kinds of discussions. They just immediately bring this about. All right, another short response. Let me ask you. Let me ask you the question. What might this be saying, this life talking in a way that you do not normally hear, but what might this be saying regarding the conditions, the unseen structures in life's own system that would bring about the attraction, bring about the condition of these two particular people being together? That's my answer to that. That's my temporary answer. I got one more that I'm just going to read. Since I always like to leave people laughing, and we've got some pretty good writers. Concluding question / comment / observation. It has begun to appear extremely obvious, says the writer, that one's eye, one's own sense of eye, deserves about the same amount and quality of attention as one's hair or feet, and for pretty much the same reasons. I now have a task. It's for you people here. It's for you people getting this on tape. Now listen. This is PP. Pregnant with possibilities. I'd like to have any response that seems worthwhile within a week. And those of you in other places, mail it to me a week after this. If it doesn't strike you of any great pertinence, you don't have to. But also, it's not limited to a week. If it hits you 2 weeks from now, a month from now, I would like to hear about it. Here is my inquiry, cum task. Is try and stretch your awareness as far as you can from lateral confines, as far as you can from the predictable, from the repetitious, and see if you cannot find an area wherein right now, and let's leave it to our part of the world, the United States, let's leave it at that right now. The overall life of man in the United States right now, what is there that could be produced that is needed, but the need is not really recognized as of yet? If that wasn't clear enough, if we were imagining into a real, strictly physical realm, which I do not intend to limit you to that, but if we were back the turn of the century and electricity was just getting enough known to be able to could be produced on a fairly constant basis, people were playing around with possibilities, and you were Thomas Edison sitting around, and you're aware of electricity, and you knew about as much as anybody did right then. And let's say it operated this way, that you sat there now and you thought, boy, I always wanted to be an inventor, and since it doesn't require a state license, I can be an inventor if I want to be. Oh, goody. And you sit down and you have a cup of coffee, get you a big old pack of cigarettes, and you prop your feet up, and you start thinking, right now electricity's around. What is it that people don't yet know that they need, that as soon as I invent it, there's going to be an immediate demand for it? And you thought the light bulb. To be able to make a thing that'll light up at night. It fits, by God, it fits. That's exactly it. And he immediately went forth, and he invented it. And the stock just immediately went through the ceiling, and the son of a bitch could afford a winter home down in Fort Myers. Got him a good hairpiece. At all times, right now, away from the world of just the apparent physical inventions. I'm not limiting, or I'm not ignoring that or excluding it, but I am certainly not pointing your attention primarily at that. And this is hard. You're going to see how hard it is. But right now, and I'm not inferring just one thing. This is not a question I have an answer and see if you get the same answer. That's not it. Assume I've got no particular answer. I got no feeling whatsoever. I'm not involved with this task. I'm involved with conjuring them up and understanding what they're based on. So this is not a right answer. But I assure you, there's one real good one, and a whole lot of pretty good ones, and a whole lot of pretty good plus of things services, activities that right now, and the signs are around you. Remember, I don't have anything in mind. I'm not trying to hint. Just assume that I can do something like this and not have anything in mind. That's gibberish, but it's possible. That there are some things that right now, if you could look in a certain way, that's what I want you to try and do, that people, they don't understand it, but people are almost pacing the floor, people are almost pacing the countryside from coast to coast, that people are sitting down, they're talking about other things ostensibly, and they don't realize it, but what they're talking about is, boy, I wish we had this thing, this activity, this service, this invention. And they don't even know what it is. But at all times, in this triaxial situation, there's always a place that there's this big hole, and it's waiting for Thomas Edison to invent the light bulb. And it was waiting for him to invent the phonograph after everybody had a light bulb. And he thought, well, you know, I've blown the market. If they don't all burn out, I'm broke. Everybody forget me. Everybody got a light bulb now, and I'm yesterday's news. The phonograph. At any given time, and right now in particular is what we're dealing with, people, as it were, are sitting around without knowing it. And they're patting their foot. And they're doing this. They're expectant, and they don't know what. There is this need to be filled, and the need has not yet been identified. But those that life use, they don't really see it as identifying a need so much as suddenly something comes to them, and it's almost simultaneous. They understand, hey, people need that. Call a lawyer, get me some stock, print it up. I want you to see if you cannot find something that strikes you. I mean, it strikes you, don't send it to me. Don't hand it in. I don't need you to read something boring. But see if you can identify an area right now and put a name, describe it, that I can almost see, I can almost feel, I'm almost assured that people, a large number of people today in our country, in our society, need this, and nobody realizes it. But if I produce this blank, this thing, this service, this activity, there is an immediate market that nobody, including the market itself, recognizes. It's people stumbling around in the dark, hurting their foot, but they don't know that they need a light bulb. Nobody ever heard of a light bulb. But as soon as they heard about it, they all went, yeah, goddamn, give me one. See if you can find that, because it is always this unrecognized need, this unrecognized market is always extant. See if you can find one. You'll know it if you find one. If you got any doubt, don't send it to me. Don't hand it in. But keep this in mind. Go on with it. Go on with your bad self.